Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is your program bringing you news, views, updates, analysis, and I hope interesting discussion on religious liberty events in the US and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed and I'm editor of Liberty magazine. And by way of advertising, I have to remind you that this is a magazine that's been around for 100 years, dedicated to religious freedom for all under the model of separation of church and state. Please read it when you get a chance. Go online. My guest on this program is John Ashmeade, attorney John Ashmeade, Associate Director of the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department for the Atlantic Union of the Seventh Adventist Church, which is on the northeastern seaboard mostly of the US. Let's talk about some current affairs and what that might have a bearing on religious liberty. I'm very interested in history generally, but particularly after going to Turkey a few years ago, staying in Istanbul. I more and more see that as a huge center of some serious developments that are affecting world geopolitics and religious liberty. And I know you're aware of a very important case that our Religious Liberty Department have been watching with a Christian missionary. What's his name?
Pastor Brunson.
Andrew Brunson.
Yeah.
What's his situation in Turkey?
So it seems like he went to Turkey as a missionary, and he was working with the Kurds, and seems to have run afoul of the government in Turkey, and he's now, he was arrested, imprisoned. I think he's now home on house arrest, but certainly facing some serious time in prison.
And he's been charged with terrorism.
Yes.
It's not a minor charge, right. But 30-some years penalty. I'm surprised that it's not the firing squad. They right. Deal pretty rough with terrorists in that part of the world.
Right. It tells us it can be a dangerous thing to be a missionary, yeah. And the freedoms that we enjoy here are not necessarily there in many countries around the world.
Now, my gut feeling, and there's not a lot of information on what's going on with him, it seems positive that he's gone to house arrest rather than under strict detention, but he still has to face the courts in a sentencing. But my gut feeling is that he perhaps stumbled naively as a Christian missionary to all people and being open. He stumbled into the huge conflict going on in Turkey between the Kurds and their separatist ambitions, and a more and more repressive and Islamist, I'm hesitating on Islamists because it's not true to say that Erdogan, the president, is, he's no Osama bin Laden,
right.
But he wants to redefine Turkey from its Muslim societal base rather than as Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, did. He wanted to pull it away from that toward a westernized state. And so I think Andrew Brunson sort of stumbled into it.
Right.
But Turkey takes this very, very seriously, and it remains to be seen. Has he just offended them because of their internal struggle, or is he a proxy for a developing conflict with the West, with NATO, which Turkey is a member, and with the US, led by Trump now, that seems intent on humbling Turkey? And right. I don't really know what the end point is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. Certainly the administration has taken an interest, and they have imposed some sanctions on a member of NATO. And so we don't know how this will ultimately play out. But our primary concern is for Pastor Brunson and wanting to see a resolution, from a religious liberty point of view, wanting to see a resolution that affirms religious liberty and missionary work and people's ability to make choices on their own.
And what's swirling around Turkey is, remember, next door in Syria, there's been really a civil war, but a civil war with multiple parties, not just right. two parties. And the most pernicious group have been ISIS, or Daesh, as they call them there. But they're trying to establish an Islamic state in the Levant.
Right.
You've heard that term before, but
yes,
most people haven't.
Right.
And what's Levant? It's the coastal area in the Holy Land. Isn't there a prophecy somewhere that talks about the King of the North planting his pavilions between the holy city and the sea?
I think there's a prophecy in the book of Daniel, and you know, it remains open to interpretation. There are many views on that. You know, some view that as a Christian entity planting, you know, its embassy of some sort in that area, but you know, time will tell.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting this is the fulfillment, but
Right.
I'm bringing up for people to think about. The Levant is historically a very significant place, and prophetically, it's where it happens.
Right.
And so we've had a radical Islamic terrorist insurgency operation operating there, and ironically, Turkey has supported them in some ways rather than support the Kurds, who the US have depended on to fight their battle as a proxy against. And I'm bringing this all up because I think it just shows the great religious conflicts at work. Right. The ISIS have persecuted the Yazdis, as well as the Christians, scattering to the four winds. And I remember a few years ago reading that there were 500,000 Christian refugees in Jordan from Syria. You know, from a religious liberty perspective, persecution of anyone for their faith is reprehensible. From our Christian perspective, we need to understand that an inordinate amount of Christians in the Middle East are being persecuted and driven out of that area.
Many, and I think people refer to this as historic Christianity, right. and they have been displaced, they have been persecuted. Many Christian buildings and churches have been bombed or you know, right. destroyed. And this is a very serious issue, and you know, I think it requires the world to intervene in some way. Yeah. And that's not happened sufficiently.
No, and it's one of the amazements to me of recent years that with what other magazines have characterized as the final expulsion of Christians from the Middle East taking place. Yes, the right aid groups have noticed this. But internationally, there doesn't seem to be a hue and a cry that we need right. to do something about this. Right. It's partly a mystery to me, to be honest.
Right. And you know, that area was once, you know, a center for Christianity, as was Africa.
Began. I mean, Turkey is home to the churches of Revelation. Right. And of course, that's right next door to Syria, and then modern-day Israel, where you know, the Sea of Galilee and Capernaum and all of the haunts of Jesus and the events of the New Testament, and then the Old Testament, right, again, Syria, Damascus. Right. And Damascus is only about 30, 40 miles from the border with Israel. Right. I've been there twice, and it's still an amazement to me. You can stand on the Golan Heights looking down only a few miles, and it seems further down than it is away to Capernaum. You can see it there at the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, and then you can look north, and if the day's clear, you can just see the outskirts of Damascus. Right. Right. With all of the stuff on the TV news and that, I think that escapes most people how close this encounter is. Right. And you know, thankfully at this point, when the Russian planes zip over Syria and the Israeli planes zip across the border to attack Syria, and the US planes come on their bombing mission, and as Putin even kindly acknowledged once, the Australian planes there, you know, right. where I'm from, they have air traffic control. Right. It's such a tight thing. When I was in Israel, I remember seeing an Israeli jet come zooming overhead, and almost as soon as you could see the flames out the back from the afterburner, and as soon as he sped up, he had to go into a sharp turn because he was on the border with Jordan.
Well, you know, it shows you that you have a real small piece of land, yeah. and you know, a number of people from different faiths and traditions all clustered into that area, and it certainly makes it difficult, yeah. You know, for them all to get along, yeah. and to, you know, live in harmony with one another. That is a challenge, and that's something that you know, we've got to take a real good look at. Yeah.
Now. You know, the West has tried. The West has played a double role. There's no question that on the medium term, they've probably caused a lot of the troubles, not the US particularly. I remember years and years ago, shortly after 9/11, I sat next to, let's just call him, a highly committed Muslim activist on a plane. And you know, he was telling me, you know, I questioned why they would even fly planes into buildings. And he says, why not? It's the only way we can get America. And I said, well, it seems to me that England has done more to frustrate the Arab nationalist cause. Oh, he poo-hooed at that. And he says, we don't care about England. It's America we want.
Okay.
But in reality, England laid the groundwork. I think with somewhat mixed, if not good intentions. They had the Balfour Declaration that established a homeland for the leftover Jews after the Holocaust. That offended the population in the area. It didn't, narrowly speaking, start as a religious conflict, but like many conflicts, once it started, religious loyalties and biases and all the rest have kicked in big time, haven't they?
Right.
So you're a good student of prophecy. Where is this heading?
Wow, that's really difficult to determine. When you look at prophecy and what our church has taught, we've tended to kind of shy away from, highlighting literal wars, physical wars, and, sort of focused on the more spiritual dimensions of end time conflicts. And so it's difficult. Some people think that, the issues at the end of time will be over in the Middle East and in that area. Others kind of disagree with that. So.
Well, we're right on one thing, and I think it needs to be emphasized. It always has been the case that you're not saved by someone else or belonging to a group. You're saved by your relationship to God and your loyalty to Him. And that cannot change. But I'm quite convinced on my reading of prophecy that there's a role, let's just put it though, there's a role for literal events in that part of the world till the very end, because God's original people of the promise still exist. And ancestral, for want of a better word, hatreds, or at least elemental hatreds from forces inspired by Satan, still want to cause them grief. So what we're seeing is a continuation of what you read in the Old Testament and the major and minor prophets of one time it's Babylon and Syria coming up and causing grief for God's people. So we have to see more of the same. And how that cannot impact the religious dynamic even far afield, even in the United States.
I think what prophecy teaches us is that there will be conflicts. There will be
wars. And rumors of wars.
Rumors of wars,
yes.
right. As we get closer to the end of time, there will be coalitions that develop, and the focus, however, will shift to God's people. And the threat that they play or they hold to this end time coalition that's developing.
Yes, that's a good summary of what we've held.
I guess we've got to be careful, I think, of focusing on individual nations or locations.
Okay.
I think we're dealing with more of a global struggle rather than a location.
You would probably agree with me that it was not a positive move for the U.S. to finally acknowledge that Jerusalem is the capital of newly reformulated Israel.
Well, it certainly wasn't positive for the Palestinians. The evangelical community, I'm sure, is happy with that because they come from a different perspective and they see part of that acknowledgement as fulfilling end time prophecy. Yeah. And so there you see the intersection between religion and politics. There's sort of strange bedfellows.
That's what I really wanted to bring out. And maybe we can discuss it a bit more after a short break, so stay with us. We're talking about current events, not just prophecy and not just religion, things that are happening now. Welcome back to Liberty Insider. Before the break with my guest, I've been talking about events that I know you're very reticent to get into, but you're the guest and I'm going to put you under the grill. But it begs the discussion, what's happening in the Middle East, and most recently with the US president putting some tariffs on Turkey and then the Turkish economy tumbling. There's something big happening in that area. You and I, nobody else could really know exactly where these secular events are happening, but I think we're agreed from our previous discussion that religion is at the center of everything. And we've spoken about Pastor Brunson, and in the break I reminded you of the Crimean War. I just believe this is necessary to know it as an antecedent to what's happening today. Did you study the Korean War in school in the U.S.?
No,
The Crimean War. Not
no,
the
I didn't. But you tell me, what are the highlights
I have
that
a
you
burden
think?
on it.
Yeah.
I don't know definitively whether it's in the history books in the U.S. I studied history here, but it was at a college level.
Sure.
I don't know if it's in the grade school books, but it's a very significant war. The way you would get it here would be Florence Nightingale, and the nurses and so on.
Sure.
It was during the Crimean War that the killing was so great and the deaths from injury was so great that everybody sensed there was a need for a formal nursing service, and the idea of germs was just starting to catch on. So it really was the beginning of a modern treatment of the killing in wars. But the Crimean War started from a religious reason.
Sure.
It was the biggest war before World War I. Was very close to a world war because it involved all the major powers. And it started when Eastern Orthodox Russia took great exception to the Ottoman Turkish Empire mistreating, they said, the Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem. And so they threatened to go to war with them. Now, there were rivalries with the great powers, and Catholic France had the same objection and were ready to attack Turkey for the same reason, but they were bothered that the Eastern Orthodox Church was taking the lead. Protestant England bothered the same reason. So they all had religious objections, and there were the three Christian nations against Turkey, but the three couldn't agree among themselves. They were rivals. So it ended up that France and England allied themselves against Russia in defense of Turkey. And so that's why it's called the Crimean War, and why I think it's relevant. One reason I think it's relevant. We're still poking the Russian bear because they retook Crimea.
Right.
But back then that was Russia.
Right.
And it was all fought on the Crimean Peninsula to defeat Russia and keep them away from Turkey. And if you look at the map, Russia's just lurking slightly to the north of Turkey, and even today, their fleet based on the Crimean Peninsula has to go through the Bosphorus. Right. In other words, through downtown Istanbul, under the bridge, to get out into the Mediterranean and out to sea. Sure. So Turkey holds a choke point on Russia. Okay. Did then and does now. And the war, like a lot of wars, ended very inconclusively. It really never shifted from the Crimean Peninsula. Right. There were some heavy battles fought there, including the infamous charge of the Light Brigade. Right. A death gallop down a valley into the cannon. Makes nice poetry, but just stupid military exercise.
Right. And how do you see the events that took place then now impacting the conflict today?
Well, it explains why Crimea is so important to Russia even today. It's strategically vital. It explains why those same powers have a vested interest in that part of the world. It cuts through what we think now are just secular wars and explains this is all about religion, right. Religious rivalries. Right. Of course, there's a subtext or an overlay of a common market or European Union economic interests and Russian hegemony, you name it. But at the end of the day, these are peoples with religious loyalties that are bumping up against each other, in my view. Right. And as we said before the break, Andrew Brunson, right. A little bit of the meat caught in this sandwich. And we can expect to see more religious liberty challenges, I think.
Right. And in terms of, today, when you look at the Middle East, you also see religious views sort of holding sway and trying to bring about some sort of peace. You have Christians on the one hand, you have Jews, and then you have the Muslims. And they're all fighting over that small piece of land.
They're fighting over it. I don't know which Christian groups are pushing for peace.
Well,
or which religious groups are pushing for peace.
Well, in the sense that they're fighting over this land, and there's no ability to bring about peace because everyone has firm theological views on whose land it is and how the land should be divided. And I think that prevents the parties from coming together and resolving the conflict in a peaceful manner.
Now, you're a lawyer, and I don't think your specialty is real estate transactions.
It certainly is not.
No,
okay.
But it seems to be a lot of that is what's at stake in Jerusalem and the West Bank and so on.
Right.
Because it's common for Israel, for example, to take land from the Palestinians, either just because they want to expand an area or as punishment, which it's a standard policy. If a young kid throws a rock at a soldier or whatever, they will then destroy the family home and appropriate the land. Right. But I know what makes that easy. People don't have title to land in that area. Right. It's been in their home and their family for so many generations, it's gone. And who knows when they got it, how they got it, but everyone in the village knows. Right. But you have a modern state, as Israel most assuredly is. It's not a religious state. It's a socialist, secular state. Okay. And it has a battle plan or a plan of enlargement. So it doesn't recognize just because the neighbors say it's theirs. This is open land. We have sovereign rights to it. But the great injustices are being done, and the religious overlay of the country is being affected in a great way. Right. So I don't know the answer. Nobody does. Right. We've had President Jimmy Carter. He got a few people to shake hands. Of course, every president since. I can't say our present president has really tested his mettle yet. Right. If anything, he sort of poked the nest a bit with designating Jerusalem.
But I think the real issue for us as Christians is, does the Bible have anything to say about this conflict in particular? And that's what I don't think.
That's a central philosophical point. I think an immediate interest for Christians is we should be raising our voices for justice. Right. And not sinking back into the mindset of the crusade, where it's fine, trouble in the Holy Land. Let's raise our red flag and our cross banner. Right. No, I think we should be against injustice. There's many of them. People shouldn't be taken off their land. Jews shouldn't be subjected to terrorism by countries that maintain a state of war. It's multifaceted. Right.
But the point I was trying to make is I think that many Christians are using their interpretation of prophecy to guide the policy in the Middle East. And I think that's problematic.
That goes directly to recognizing Jerusalem. That's what's at play there.
We can believe in end time prophecy. We can, think that we know how things are going to unfold. But then the question is, should we try to shape policy to fulfill our prophecy? And I think I see a little bit of that taking place right now in the Middle East, and I think that's unfortunate, and it works an injustice for everyone involved.
Right. The Lord doesn't need help to his purposes are obscure in many ways. Right. And there are a number of people, how many I can't say, but they're more influential than the numbers that I'm certain of in the US, that have an end time scenario that involves Israel, Armageddon, the secret rapture even, and it all has to come to a head for them. Right. And it may. I'm not so sure the Bible, you can say from looking at the Bible prophecies and Old Testament predictions that it won't. Right. But it's another thing to say, well, it's going to, so I'm going to make it happen. Right. I'm going to manipulate events in an unjust way as well to produce conflict, and out of that, my Lord will come. Right. Some of the Muslims have that view. Right. The Al-Qaeda had that. They wanted chaos, and out of chaos will come the caliphate. Right. So we need to steer clear of precipitating war. We should live at peace with all men. Right. We should seek justice for all people. This is religious liberty, isn't it? Right. And to the degree that the times are dangerous and volatile, I think true Christians, more than that, true people of faith should be working for peace, harmony, and looking at our fellow creatures as people deserving of justice and mercy and under God's favor as much as us.
Right. I think it's important that we not use our religious beliefs to diminish the humanity of others. And unfortunately, from time to time, we see that taking place in certain hotspots around the world. The Middle East comes to mind. Turkey comes to mind. But ultimately, we should remember the humanity of all of those around us and, work to protect life, preserve life. And I think that if we do that, we are fulfilling the law of God.
Not too long ago, the U.S. State Department held its first ever Ministerial for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This was a landmark event and occasion for religious liberty, and a first. whatever else this administration has done or appears to do that might even threaten religious liberty, this event was a step in the right direction. And central to the discussions of the international leaders, even some government ministers and religious groups from the United States, central to their discussion was the case of Andrew Brunson, a Christian missionary in Turkey who has been swept up in the conflicts there, witnessing to Kurds and accused of being a terrorist with a possible 30-some-year prison sentence. As of this moment, he's under house arrest facing a court action. It is important to realize in Turkey, as in many other places in the world, religion is at the intersection of world events, and the pressure that has followed on Turkey has been extreme. They are resisting it. Their economy is in free fall. But religion is important, no matter what the consequence. And I encourage the State Department to stand up for religion as freely as they have in the past. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.